The scream that tore through the quiet afternoon in Ely, Nevada, wasn't one of fear, but of pure rage, and Nathan Jennings heard it from 3 houses down where he was fixing Mrs. Patterson's fence post. It was May of 1884, and the sun beat down mercilessly on the dusty street as he dropped his hammer and ran toward the sound, his boots kicking up clouds of dirt with each stride. What he found when he burst through the open door of the small clapboard house made his blood run cold, not from violence or danger, but from something far more insidious. Grace Blackwell stood in the center of her sparse kitchen, tears streaming down her hollow cheeks as she clutched an empty flour sack in her trembling hands. The woman couldn't have been more than 22 years old, but her gaunt frame and the way her dress hung loose on her shoulders made her look like she'd aged a decade in mere months. Her husband, Thomas Blackwell, stood near the door with his arms crossed, his face red with anger, and between them lay the shattered remains of what looked like it had once been a plate. "What's going on here?" Nathan demanded, his tall frame filling the doorway as his gray eyes swept the scene. Thomas turned to him with a sneer. "This ain't your business, Jennings. Get out of my house." But Nathan's attention had already shifted to Grace, and what he saw made his jaw clench. She was so thin that her collarbone protruded sharply beneath her faded calico dress, and her wrists looked like they might snap if she gripped anything too hard. Her brown eyes were sunken, rimmed with dark circles that spoke of hunger and sleepless nights. In the 2 years since he'd seen Thomas Blackwell bring his new bride to Ely, she'd wasted away to almost nothing. "Madam, are you all right?" Nathan asked gently. Ignoring Thomas completely, Grace opened her mouth to speak, but her husband cut her off. "I said get out. My wife is fine. She's just being dramatic because I told her she can't have supper until she finishes all her chores." Nathan's eyes narrowed. "It's near 4 in the afternoon, and from the looks of it, she hasn't eaten all day, maybe longer." "That's my decision to make," Thomas shot back. "She's my wife, and I'll run my household how I see fit. If she wants to eat, she can earn it by doing what she's told without complaining." The silence that followed was thick enough to cut with a knife. Nathan had known Thomas Blackwell was a hard man, cold and calculating in his business dealings at the general store where he worked as a clerk. But this was beyond anything he'd imagined. He'd heard rumors in town, whispers from other women about how Grace never came to church socials anymore, how she'd stopped appearing at quilting circles, but he'd written it off as idle gossip. Now he saw the truth written in every sharp angle of her starving body. "Step outside with me, Blackwell," Nathan said, his voice low and dangerous. "I told you now." Something in Nathan's tone must have convinced Thomas that arguing would be unwise, because he stalked out of the house with Nathan following close behind. The moment they were out of Grace's earshot, Nathan grabbed Thomas by the collar and slammed him against the side of the house hard enough to rattle the boards. "You're starving that woman," Nathan growled. Thomas tried to push him away, but Nathan's grip was iron. "She's lazy. She doesn't do half of what she should. My mother could run a household twice this size without breaking a sweat. Your mother probably had food in her belly to give her the strength to work." Nathan's voice was deadly calm now, which was somehow more terrifying than his earlier anger. "How long has this been going on? That's none of your concern." Nathan tightened his grip. "How long?" Thomas's bravado finally cracked under the weight of Nathan's stare. "She gets fed when she earns it. That's how a household should run. A wife should be obedient and hardworking." "A man who starves his wife is no man," Nathan said, releasing Thomas with enough force that the smaller man stumbled. "He's a coward and a bully, and he doesn't deserve to call himself human, let alone a husband." Thomas straightened his shirt with shaking hands. You can't just come into my life and tell me how to handle my own wife. This is none of your business. I'm making it my business." Nathan pulled out his wallet and extracted several bills, shoving them into Thomas's chest. "That's for food. Real food. Meat, vegetables, bread, whatever she needs. And I'm going to be checking on her, Blackwell. If I find out you've laid a hand on her or kept food from her again, you'll answer to me. Do you understand?" Thomas's face went from red to purple with rage, but he knew better than to challenge Nathan Jennings directly. Nathan was known throughout Ely as a fair man, but not one to cross. He'd worked his way up from a simple ranch hand to owning a small but prosperous cattle operation just outside of town, and he'd done it through hard work and an ironclad sense of right and wrong. Men respected him, and those who didn't learn to fear him. "You'll regret interfering," Thomas muttered, but he took the money. "The only thing I regret is not noticing sooner," Nathan replied. He waited until Thomas slouched back into the house before following him inside. Grace hadn't moved from her spot in the kitchen. She stared at the broken plate at her feet as though it held all the answers to questions she was too afraid to ask. When Nathan approached her, she flinched slightly, and that small movement hit him harder than any punch ever could. "Madam, I'm not going to hurt you," he said softly, "but I need you to listen to me. When's the last time you had a proper meal?" She looked up at him, and for a moment he thought she might lie. But then her face crumpled and she whispered, 3 days ago. Maybe 4, I lose track sometimes." Nathan felt his heart crack clean in two. 3 days, maybe 4. And from the looks of her, this wasn't the first time she'd gone hungry. "Does he do this often?" Grace glanced nervously at Thomas, who stood in the corner glowering at them both. "I should get back to my chores. I have to beat the rugs and scrub the floors before dark." "Not on an empty stomach, you won't." Nathan turned to Thomas. "Get to the store and buy what I told you to buy. Now." For a moment, it looked like Thomas might argue, but something in Nathan's eyes must have convinced him otherwise. He grabbed his hat and stormed out of the house, slamming the door behind him hard enough to rattle the windows. Once he was gone, Nathan turned back to Grace. "Sit down before you fall down. When did this start?" She sank into one of the rickety kitchen chairs as though her legs could no longer support her weight. "A few months after we married. At first, it was just little things. He'd complain about the food I cooked, say it wasn't good enough. Then he started saying I didn't deserve to eat if I couldn't cook properly. After a while, it became about everything. The house wasn't clean enough. The laundry wasn't done fast enough. I wasn't grateful enough for all he did for me." Her voice broke. "I tried so hard to make him happy. I did everything he asked, but it was never enough." Nathan pulled out the other chair and sat down across from her, his large frame making the furniture look like it belonged in a child's playhouse. "That's because it was never about you. Men like that, they need someone to control. It makes them feel powerful when they're really just small inside." "I don't have anywhere else to go," Grace whispered. "My parents died of fever 2 years ago. Thomas was kind to me when I was grieving, offered to take care of me. I thought I was lucky to find someone who wanted me. I thought marriage would be like what my parents had, partnership and kindness and love." She laughed bitterly. "I was so foolish." "You weren't foolish. You were trusting, and he took advantage of that." Nathan leaned forward, his elbows on his knees. "But things are going to change starting now. I meant what I said to him. I'll be checking on you, and if he tries this again, he'll have me to deal with." Grace's eyes filled with fresh tears. "Why would you do that for me? You don't even know me." "I know enough. I know you don't deserve to be treated like this. No one does." He stood and walked to the window, looking out at the dusty street. "My mother used to say that you can judge a man's character by how he treats those who are weaker than him. By that measure, Thomas Blackwell is no man at all." They sat in silence for a while. the afternoon sun casting long shadows across the worn floorboards. When Thomas finally returned, he dumped the supplies on the table without a word and disappeared into the bedroom, slamming that door too. Nathan helped Grace put the food away, noting how her hands shook when she touched the packages of meat and flour and beans, as though she was afraid they might disappear if she blinked. "I'll make you something now," he said. "Do you have a stove that works?" "You don't have to. I know I don't have to, but I'm going to anyway." He found a pan and some lard, started frying some of the bacon he'd made Thomas buy. The smell filled the small house, rich and savory, and he saw Grace's eyes track every movement he made with desperate hunger. When the bacon was done, he scrambled some eggs to go with it, added some bread and butter on the side. It was simple food, nothing fancy, but when he set the plate in front of Grace, she looked at it like it was a feast fit for royalty. "Go on," he encouraged. "Eat." She picked up her fork with trembling hands and took a small bite. Then another. Then she was eating in earnest, trying to maintain some dignity but clearly ravenous. Nathan turned away to give her privacy, busying himself with cleaning the pan, but his jaw was clenched so tight it ached. When she finally finished, she set down her fork and wiped her eyes. "Thank you. I don't know how to repay you for your kindness. You don't owe me anything." He dried his hands on a towel. "But I want you to promise me something. If things get bad again, if he tries to hurt you or starve you, you come find me. I have a ranch about 3 miles north of town. Anyone can give you directions. You come straight there, you hear me? I can't just leave my husband. Maybe not, but you can save your own life." He put his hat back on. "I'll be by tomorrow to check on you, and the day after that, every day until I'm sure you're safe." True to his word, Nathan appeared at the Blackwell house the next afternoon. Thomas was at work, and Grace was sweeping the front porch when he rode up on his bay mare. She looked marginally better than she had the day before, a bit more color in her cheeks, though she was still far too thin. "Afternoon, madam," Nathan greeted, tipping his hat. "Just wanted to see how you're doing." "Better, thank you." She set the broom aside. "Thomas was angry after you left yesterday, but he didn't stop me from eating breakfast this morning. He even made coffee." "That's good." Nathan dismounted and tied his horse to the fence post. "But how are you really doing?" Grace hesitated, then said quietly, "Scared." Waiting for the other shoe to drop. Thomas doesn't like being told what to do, and he especially doesn't like being challenged in his own home. "He lay a hand on you?" "No, but the way he looks at me sometimes." She trailed off, hugging herself despite the warm afternoon. "I don't know how long this truce will last." Nathan frowned. "If you want to leave, I can help arrange that. There are women in town who would take you in, or you could go somewhere else, start fresh." "With what money? What skills? I barely made it through school before my parents got sick." "I can cook and clean and sew, but so can every other woman, and I'm married. That means something, even if the marriage is—" She stopped herself. "I made vows. I can't just break them. Even if keeping them kills you." The question hung in the air between them, heavy with implications that neither of them wanted to examine too closely. Finally, Grace said, "Let me worry about that, but I appreciate you checking on me. It means more than you know." Nathan visited every day for the next 2 weeks, and each time he saw subtle changes in Grace. The hollow look in her eyes faded slightly. She moved with a bit more energy. Color returned to her pale skin. But there was also a growing awareness between them, an unspoken connection that went beyond simple concern for her welfare. He found himself thinking about her at odd times, wondering if she was eating enough, if Thomas was treating her better, if she was happy or just surviving. And Grace, for her part, found herself watching for him each afternoon, her heart beating a little faster when she heard his horse approaching. She told herself it was gratitude, Nothing more. He'd saved her life, after all. It would be strange if she didn't feel something. But gratitude didn't explain the way her breath caught when he smiled at her, or how safe she felt when he was nearby, or the guilty pleasure she took in their brief conversations. She was a married woman, and whatever she felt for Nathan Jennings needed to stay locked away in the deepest part of her heart, where it could never see the light of day. One afternoon in early June, Nathan arrived to find Grace sitting on the porch steps with a split lip and a bruise blooming across her left cheekbone. He was off his horse before she could stand, his hands gentle as he tilted her face to examine the damage. "He did this," Nathan said, "and it wasn't a question. I burned his dinner. It was an accident. I was distracted, and there's no excuse." Nathan's voice was deadly calm. "Where is he?" "Nathan, don't, please. It'll only make things worse." "Worse than this." He gestured to her injured face. "Grace, this has to stop. Today, now, you're coming with me." "I can't." "Yes, you can, and you will." He stood and held out his hand. "I won't let you stay here another minute. Pack whatever you can carry in 5 minutes. We're leaving." Grace stared up at him, torn between fear and hope. "Where would I go? My ranch. I have a spare room. You'll be safe there. People will talk. Let them talk. Better they talk than attend your funeral." His gray eyes were fierce with determination. "Please, Grace, trust me." And God help her, she did. Maybe it was the desperation of her situation, or the kindness he'd shown her, or something deeper that she didn't dare name. But she stood and went inside, quickly gathering her few possessions into a canvas bag. Her wedding ring sat on the kitchen counter, and after a moment's hesitation, she left it there. Let Thomas have it back. She didn't want any reminder of these terrible months. Nathan helped her onto his horse, then swung up behind her. The warmth of his body against her back, the solid strength of his arms on either side of her as he held the reins, made her feel safer than she had in months. As they rode out of town toward his ranch, she didn't look back. The ranch itself was modest but well-maintained, with a sturdy 2-story house, a barn, corrals, and several outbuildings. Nathan helped her down and led her inside, showing her to a small but clean bedroom on the 2nd floor. "It's not much, but it's yours for as long as you need it," he said. "The door has a lock. Use it if it makes you feel better." Grace looked around the room, taking in the simple furniture, the handmade quilt on the bed, the curtains that actually matched. It was more than she'd had in months. "Thank you. I don't know how I'll ever repay you." "You've thanked me enough times. No need to keep doing it." He shifted uncomfortably. "I have a ranch hand, Miguel, who lives in the bunkhouse. Good man, been with me for 3 years. He'll respect your privacy, but he'll also help keep you safe if Thomas comes around looking for trouble. There's also Mrs. Chen, who comes twice a week to help with cooking and laundry. She's discreet and kind. You'll like her." Over the next few weeks, Grace slowly began to heal, both physically and mentally. She gained weight, the bruises faded, and the constant fear that had been her companion for so long started to loosen its grip. Nathan was careful to maintain a respectful distance, never imposing on her space, always asking before entering a room she was in. But despite his caution, the bond between them grew stronger. They fell into an easy routine. Grace would help with the household chores, though Nathan insisted she didn't have to earn her keep. They'd have breakfast together, then he'd head out to work the ranch while she tended the garden she'd started or helped Mrs. Chen with the mending. In the evenings, they'd sit on the porch and talk as the sun set behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink and purple. It was during one of these conversations, about 3 months after she'd come to stay with him, that Nathan finally brought up the subject they'd both been avoiding. "You're still married to him," he said quietly. "Legally, I mean. Grace's hand stilled on the shirt she was mending. "I know. And that bothers you, shouldn't it? I took vows, for better or worse in sickness and health." She set the mending aside. "But he broke his vows first, didn't he? He promised to love and cherish me, to provide for me. He did none of those things." "No, he didn't." Nathan leaned back in his chair, studying the horizon. "There's talk in town about you being here. Most folks seem to understand why you left, but there are some who think you should go back, that a woman's place is with her husband no matter what. What do you think?" He turned to look at her, and the intensity in his gaze made her heart skip. "I think you're the bravest person I've ever met. I think you survived something that would have broken most people. And I think you deserve to be happy, to feel safe, to live without fear. Whatever that looks like, wherever that is. Even if that means staying here." The question slipped out before she could stop it, soft and tentative. "Especially if it means staying here." He reached over and took her hand, his calloused palm warm against her skin. "Grace, I need to be honest with you about something. These past few months, having you here, getting to know you, it's been the best part of my day, every day. I look forward to coming in from the fields just to see your smile. I lie awake at night thinking about you. And I know this is complicated. I know you're technically still married to Thomas, but I can't keep pretending I don't feel what I feel." Grace's breath caught in her throat. "Nathan, I'm in love with you," he said simply. "Have been for a while now, if I'm being honest. And I don't expect you to feel the same way. God knows you've been through enough without me adding pressure. But I needed you to know. Because if there's even a chance that you might feel something for me too, if there's a possibility of a future for us, then I want to fight for it. I want to help you get a divorce from Thomas. I want to build a life with you. A real life, based on respect and partnership and love." Tears spilled down Grace's cheeks, but for once they were tears of joy rather than pain. "I thought I was losing my mind. I thought there was something wrong with me for feeling this way about you when I'm still legally married. But I can't help it. When I'm with you, I feel like myself again. Like the person I was before Thomas, only better, stronger. You make me want to believe in love again, in happiness in the future. I do feel the same way. I love you too." Nathan stood and pulled her to her feet, his hands cupping her face with infinite gentleness. "Then we'll figure this out together. I'll find a lawyer, we'll get you a divorce. It might take time and it won't be easy, but I'm not going anywhere. I'll wait as long as it takes." When he kissed her, it was nothing like the cold, demanding kisses Thomas had forced on her. This was gentle and sweet and full of promise, a beginning rather than an ending. Grace wrapped her arms around his neck and kissed him back, pouring all her hope and love and gratitude into that single moment. Getting a divorce proved even more difficult than they'd anticipated. Thomas contested it viciously, claiming that Grace had abandoned him without cause and that she'd been unfaithful with Nathan. The legal process dragged on for months, with accusations flying back and forth and the whole town taking sides. Some people supported Grace, having witnessed Thomas's cruelty firsthand or heard the rumors. Others thought she was a harlot who'd broken her sacred vows for a richer man. Through it all, Nathan stood by her side, unwavering in his support. He hired the best lawyer in Nevada, a sharp-minded woman named Elizabeth Morrison, who'd made a name for herself fighting for women's rights. Elizabeth tore Thomas's claims apart piece by piece, bringing forward witnesses who testified to his abuse, to the way he'd starved Grace, to the bruises they'd seen on her face and arms. The local doctor testified that when he'd examined Grace after she left Thomas, she'd been severely malnourished and showed signs of prolonged neglect. The trial took place in late autumn of 1885, more than a year after Grace had fled her marriage. She sat in the courthouse with her hands clasped tightly in her lap, trying not to shake as Thomas glared at her from across the room. Nathan sat behind her, close enough that she could feel his presence like a shield. When the judge finally ruled in her favor, granting the divorce on grounds of cruelty and abandonment of marital duty, Grace felt something inside her chest loosen and fly free. She was no longer Grace Blackwell, property of Thomas Blackwell. She was just Grace Baker again, a woman with her own life and her own choices. Nathan was waiting for her on the courthouse steps, and when she emerged, he swept her into his arms and spun her around, both of them laughing with relief and joy. People on the street stopped to stare, but Grace didn't care anymore. Let them look. Let them see what real love looked like. "Marry me," Nathan said as he set her down, his hand still on her waist. "Right now, today, as soon as we can find a preacher. I've waited long enough to make you mine properly." "Yes," Grace said without hesitation. "Yes, 1,000 times yes." They were married 2 days later in a simple ceremony at the church, with Mrs. Chen and Miguel as witnesses. Grace wore a simple blue dress that Mrs. Chen had helped her make, and Nathan wore his Sunday best, his hair slicked back and his boots polished to a shine. The preacher kept the service short and sweet, and when he pronounced them man and wife, Nathan kissed Grace with such tenderness that she thought her heart might burst from happiness. The ranch felt different after that, transformed from a sanctuary into a true home. Grace threw herself into making it beautiful, planting flowers around the house, hanging curtains, filling the rooms with warmth and life. Nathan expanded the cattle operation with Grace's input, valuing her opinions and treating her as the partner she deserved to be. Their first year of marriage was everything Grace had once dreamed of. Nathan was attentive and kind, always asking about her day, helping with chores without being asked, bringing her wildflowers he'd found while riding the range. They talked for hours about everything and nothing, shared their dreams and fears, built a foundation of trust and respect that went bone deep. In the bedroom, Nathan was patient and gentle, never pushing her beyond what she was comfortable with. He helped her reclaim her body as her own, showed her that intimacy could be beautiful rather than something to be endured. Grace blossomed under his care, discovering a passionate side of herself she'd never known existed. By the spring of 1886, Grace realized she was pregnant. She'd been feeling queasy in the mornings, and her monthly courses had stopped, but she'd been too afraid to hope until Mrs. Chen pointed out the signs with a knowing smile. When she told Nathan, he picked her up and twirled her around just like he had on the courthouse steps, whooping with joy loud enough to startle the horses. "We're going to have a baby," he kept saying, as though he couldn't quite believe it. "A real baby, our baby. What do you want?" Grace asked, her hand resting on her still flat stomach. "A boy or a girl, I don't care as long as you're both healthy," though he paused, looking a bit sheepish. "A boy would be nice, someone to teach to ride and rope and run the ranch someday. And if it's a girl, then I'll teach her to ride and rope and run the ranch." He kissed her forehead. "Any child of ours will be capable of anything they set their mind to, regardless of whether they're wearing trousers or skirts." The pregnancy was easier than Grace had feared, though she was sick for the first few months and utterly exhausted by the last trimester. Nathan hovered over her like a mother hen, insisting she rest, bringing her water and food, rubbing her swollen feet in the evenings. Dr. Harrison, the same physician who testified at her divorce trial, checked on her regularly and pronounced both mother and baby healthy. Their son was born on a cold January morning in 1887, during a brief snowstorm that dusted the Nevada desert with white. Grace labored for 12 hours with Mrs. Chen and the doctor attending her, and Nathan pacing a hole in the parlor floor downstairs. When the baby finally arrived, red-faced and squalling with indignation at being forced into the world, Nathan burst into tears. "He's perfect," he said, holding his son for the first time with such wonder that Grace fell in love with him all over again. "Look at him. He's perfect." They named him James Harrison Jennings. Harrison after the doctor who'd helped Grace escape her first marriage, and James because Nathan's father had borne that name. Little Jamie, as they called him, had his mother's brown eyes and his father's dark hair, and he quickly became the center of their world. Watching Nathan with their son made Grace's heart swell. He was a natural father, patient and playful, never too tired to walk the floor with a fussy baby or change a dirty diaper. He sang ridiculous songs that made Jamie giggle, built elaborate toys from scraps of wood, and treated their son with the same respect and kindness he showed everyone. As Jamie grew from infant to toddler, the ranch prospered. Nathan hired more hands and expanded the herd, building a reputation for quality cattle and fair dealing. Grace kept the books and managed the household, proving to have a head for numbers that complemented Nathan's ranching skills. They were partners in every sense of the word, making decisions together, supporting each other through challenges, celebrating victories as a team. Grace occasionally heard news of Thomas through the town grapevine. He'd lost his job at the general store after being caught stealing, moved to Carson City for a while, then disappeared entirely. She felt nothing when she heard these updates, no satisfaction or regret. That part of her life was over, closed like a book she'd finished reading and returned to the shelf. When Jamie was 2, Grace discovered she was pregnant again. This time, Nathan had learned not to spin her around, settling instead for a long, sweet kiss and a promise to take even better care of her than he had the first time. Their daughter arrived in the autumn of 1889, during the harvest season when the ranch was at its busiest. She came quickly, unlike her brother, making her entrance into the world in less than 4 hours. They named her Caroline Rose Jennings, and she was as different from Jamie as night from day. Where he'd been a placid baby, she was demanding and loud. Where he'd slept through the night by 2 months, she kept them up for what felt like years. "She knows what she wants and she's not afraid to ask for it," Nathan said one night, walking the floor with a screaming Caroline while Grace caught a few precious hours of sleep. "Can't fault her for that." "She gets it from you," Grace mumbled from the bed. "From me. I'm the most easygoing person you'll ever meet. You once told a cattle buyer that if he didn't offer a fair price, you'd drive the whole herd to California rather than let him cheat you. Well, he was trying to cheat me. And I would have done it too." He patted Caroline's back. "Hear that, little one? Your papa doesn't back down from a challenge, neither should you. As their children grew, so did their love." Grace sometimes thought about the terrified, starving woman she'd been when Nathan first found her, and she could barely recognize herself in that memory. She was strong now, healthy, confident in her worth and her place in the world. She ran the household and kept the books and raised her children, and loved her husband with a fierceness that still surprised her sometimes. Nathan, for his part, never took a single day with Grace for granted. Every morning he woke up next to her was a gift. Every evening they sat on the porch watching their children play was a moment to be treasured. He'd loved her from the beginning, from that first day when he'd seen her standing in her kitchen with hunger and desperation in her eyes. But that early love was nothing compared to what he felt now. This was deeper, richer, built on years of shared experiences and mutual respect and unwavering support. By 1892, the ranch had grown into one of the most successful operations in the region. They employed a dozen full-time hands, ran over 500 head of cattle, and had expanded into horse breeding as well. Jamie was 5 and already showing an interest in ranching, following his father around like a shadow and asking endless questions about everything. Caroline was nearly 3 and had her mother wrapped around her tiny finger, though Grace pretended otherwise. It was a good life, better than anything Grace had ever dreamed possible during those dark days of her first marriage. Sometimes she'd stand on the porch and look out at the land stretching to the horizon. At the house she'd helped build into a home, at her children playing in the yard, at Nathan riding in from the range with that smile he reserved just for her. And she'd feel so grateful it made her chest ache. One evening in late summer, after the children were in bed and the ranch had settled into quiet, Nathan found Grace in the kitchen finishing the dinner dishes. He came up behind her and wrapped his arms around her waist, resting his chin on her shoulder. "Have I told you today that I love you?" he murmured. "Only about 5 times. You're falling behind. Can't have that." He kissed her neck. "I love you. You're the best thing that ever happened to me." Grace turned in his arms, soap suds dripping from her hands. "Do you ever think about how we met, about what brought us together?" "Sometimes. Usually when I want to remind myself how lucky I am." "It was awful," she said softly. "Those months with Thomas, starving, being hurt, feeling like I was nothing. But if it hadn't happened, if I hadn't been in that situation, you wouldn't have come to help me. We might never have met." "I'd like to think we would have found each other eventually," Nathan said. "Some things are just meant to be. You saved my life that day. You know that, right? If you hadn't intervened, if you hadn't cared enough to get involved, SHH." He pressed a finger to her lips. "Any decent person would have done the same. But they didn't. Other people knew or suspected, but you were the only one who did something about it." She cupped his face in her wet hands. "You told Thomas that a man who starves his wife is no man. Do you remember that?" "I do. I meant it too. You showed me what a real man looks like, what real love looks like. You gave me a life I never thought I could have. Children, a home, happiness, safety, respect. Everything." Nathan pulled her close, holding her like she was the most precious thing in the world. "You gave me just as much. Before you, I had a ranch and work and not much else. I was lonely without even realizing it. You brought life and light and love into my world. You gave me a family. You gave me purpose beyond just existing day to day. So I think we're even." They stood there in the kitchen for a long time, just holding each other as the stars came out beyond the windows. Outside, the ranch settled into its nighttime rhythms. Inside, their children slept peacefully, safe and warm and loved. And in that quiet moment, Grace felt a peace so profound it brought tears to her eyes. This was what she'd survived for. This was what all those terrible days had been leading to. Not just escape from Thomas, but finding Nathan. Not just survival, but true happiness. Not just existence, but real living. The years continued to pass in a blur of seasons and growth and change. Jamie grew tall and strong, learning the ranch business from the ground up. Caroline proved to be as fierce and independent as her father had predicted, refusing to be limited by expectations of what little girls should and shouldn't do. Grace and Nathan added a 3rd child to their family in 1894, another boy they named William after Grace's father. And through it all, their love remained constant, a foundation that everything else was built upon. There were hard times too, of course. A drought in 1896 that nearly broke them. An outbreak of disease that took half the herd in 1898. The death of Mrs. Chen in 1900, which hit Grace hard. But they weathered every storm together, leaning on each other when times got tough, celebrating when times were good, never losing sight of what mattered most. By 1903, as they approached their 20th wedding anniversary, Grace and Nathan had built something truly remarkable. The ranch was thriving, employing over 30 people and spanning thousands of acres. Their children were healthy and happy, Jamie preparing to take over more responsibilities, Caroline studying to become a teacher despite her father's half-hearted protests that she should stay on the ranch forever, and William following in his brother's footsteps. They'd become pillars of the community, known for their fairness and generosity. On the evening of their anniversary, Nathan took Grace up to the ridge above the ranch where they could see the whole spread laid out before them. The sun was setting, painting everything in gold and amber, and Grace leaned against her husband's side as they surveyed their kingdom. 20 years, Nathan said. Feels like yesterday and a lifetime ago at the same time. We've built something good here, Grace said. Something worth being proud of, we have. But you know what I'm most proud of? He turned to face her, taking both her hands in his. Us. After everything you went through, everything that could have broken you, you still had the courage to love again, to trust again, to build a life with me. That takes more strength than most people have. You made it easy, Grace said. You showed me what love should be from the very beginning: respect, partnership, kindness. Everything Thomas wasn't. Nathan pulled something from his pocket, a small box wrapped in blue paper. I got you something. Open it. Inside was a delicate gold locket on a chain. Grace opened it to find 2 tiny photographs, one of her and Nathan on their wedding day, the other of their 3 children. Her eyes filled with tears. So you can carry us with you always, Nathan said softly. Though I suppose you already do anyway. It's perfect. She turned so he could fasten it around her neck. Thank you for this, for everything, for being the man you are, for loving me the way you do, for giving me the life I have, right back at you. He kissed her then, long and sweet, as the sun sank below the horizon and the stars began to appear overhead. When they finally pulled apart, Nathan said, "Ready to head back down, in a minute." Grace looked out at the ranch again, at the home they'd built together, at the life they'd created from the ashes of her first marriage. I just want to stay here a little longer. Remember this moment. Hold on to it. So they stood there together as darkness fell. 2 people who'd found each other in the most unlikely of circumstances and built something beautiful despite the odds. The wind carried the sounds of the ranch up to them. The lowing of cattle and the distant laughter of their children and the everyday noises of a place filled with life and love. Grace thought about that day 20 years ago when Nathan had burst into her kitchen and changed everything. When he'd looked at her with fury and compassion and told her husband that a man who starves his wife is no man. She thought about how close she'd come to dying in that house, to wasting away to nothing, to giving up entirely. She thought about all the moments that had led her here, to this ridge, to this man, to this life. And she thought about how sometimes the worst things that happen to us lead directly to the best things. How sometimes we have to survive the darkness to truly appreciate the light. How sometimes love finds us when we least expect it, in the form of a cowboy who refuses to look away from suffering, who sees injustice and decides to act, who believes that every person deserves respect and kindness and care. I love you, she whispered. I love you too, Nathan replied. Today, tomorrow, and every day after that until my last breath. That's a promise. And it was a promise he kept. They grew old together on that ranch, watching their children have children of their own, building a legacy that would last long after they were gone. They faced every challenge as a team and celebrated every victory together. They never stopped talking, never stopped learning about each other, never stopped finding new reasons to fall in love all over again. When Grace was 68 years old, sitting on the porch with Nathan's hand in hers and their grandchildren playing in the yard, she reflected on the long, strange journey that had brought her to this moment. She'd been married twice, but only loved once. She'd known hunger and cruelty and despair, but she'd also known joy and kindness and devotion beyond measure. "What are you thinking about?" Nathan asked, his hair now silver but his eyes still the same warm gray they'd been the first time she saw them. "About how grateful I am," Grace said. "For you, for this life, for every single day we've had together, even the hard ones, especially the hard ones. They taught us how strong we are together, how much we can survive when we have each other." Nathan lifted her hand and kissed her knuckles, a gesture he'd performed thousands of times over the decades, but which never failed to make her heart flutter. "Here's to many more years of surviving together, then." "Many more years," Grace agreed, and they got them. They celebrated their 50th anniversary, surrounded by children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, a sprawling family built on the foundation of their love. They watched the ranch continue to thrive under Jamie's capable management, saw Caroline become a beloved teacher who shaped young minds, and witnessed William's success as a horse breeder known throughout Nevada and beyond. When Nathan finally passed away at the age of 86, peacefully in his sleep after a long and full life, Grace mourned him deeply. But she didn't regret a single moment they'd shared. He'd given her everything she never knew she needed, and in return, she'd given him the same. They'd built something beautiful together, a life and a love that would echo through generations. Grace lived another 3 years after Nathan's death, spending her time with family and tending the garden she'd planted so many years ago. When her time came, she went peacefully, surrounded by those she loved most, with Nathan's locket still around her neck and his name the last word on her lips. They were buried side by side on the ridge where they'd stood on their 20th anniversary, overlooking the ranch they'd built together. And if you visit that spot today, you can still see the weathered headstones, still read the inscription Grace had chosen for them both. Together in life, together in eternity, a love that conquered all. It was a fitting end to a story that had begun with hunger and cruelty, but had transformed into something beautiful through courage and compassion, and the unwavering belief that everyone deserves to be treated with dignity. Nathan had saved Grace's life that day in the kitchen, but she'd saved his too, in ways neither of them could have predicted. They'd found each other in the darkness and created light together, proving that sometimes the greatest love stories come from the most unexpected places. And somewhere, in whatever comes after this life, they're still together, still holding hands, still grateful for every moment they shared. Because a love like theirs doesn't end with death. It transcends it, living on in the hearts and memories of everyone they touched, a testament to what's possible when one person has the courage to say enough, and another has the compassion to help them find their way to something better. The ranch still stands today, operated by their descendants, a thriving testament to what Grace and Nathan built together. And sometimes, on quiet evenings when the wind blows just right, the old-timers in Ely still tell the story of the starving woman and the cowboy who saved her, who showed her what real love looked like, who proved that even in the harsh wilderness of the Old West, kindness and compassion could flourish. They tell the story of how Nathan Jennings looked at Thomas Blackwell and said those words that changed everything. "A man who starves his wife is no man." And they tell the story of how Grace Baker found the courage to leave, to start over, to believe in love again. How she and Nathan built a partnership based on equality and respect. How they raised a family together. How they created something beautiful from the ashes of tragedy. It's a story worth remembering, worth retelling, worth holding up as an example of what's possible when good people refuse to look away from suffering. When they choose compassion over indifference, action over apathy, love over cruelty. It's a story about survival and redemption, and the transformative power of true partnership. Because at its heart, the story of Grace and Nathan isn't just a love story, though it certainly is that. It's a story about human dignity, about the importance of standing up for those who can't stand up for themselves, about refusing to accept that anyone should suffer in silence. It's about recognizing that how we treat the vulnerable among us defines who we are as people, as communities, as a society. Nathan could have walked away that day. He could have decided it wasn't his business, that what happened between a husband and wife was private, that interfering would cause more trouble than it was worth. Many people would have made that choice, but he didn't. He saw suffering and he acted simply and directly, with no thought for the consequences to himself. He saw a woman being starved and abused and he said no. This stops now, today, and he meant it, and Grace could have given up. She could have accepted that her lot in life was to suffer, that she deserved the treatment she received, that there was no escape. Many women in her position did exactly that, ground down by cruelty and isolation until they lost all hope. But when Nathan offered her a way out, she took it. She found the courage to leave, to start over, to believe that she deserved better. She reclaimed her life and her dignity and her future. Together, they proved that even the darkest situations can be transformed, that love can bloom in the most unlikely soil, that second chances are real and possible and worth fighting for. They showed that partnership and respect and genuine affection can build something lasting and beautiful, something that endures long after we're gone. The children they raised carried those values forward, teaching them to their own children, creating ripples that spread out through time and touched countless lives. The ranch hands who worked for them learned by example what it meant to treat people fairly, to value hard work, but also compassion, to build something rather than just taking from others. The community around them became better for having witnessed their love, for seeing what was possible when two people truly committed to each other's happiness and well-being. And maybe that's the real legacy of Grace and Nathan Jennings. Not the ranch or the wealth or the successful business they built, though those things mattered, but the example they set, the proof they provided that love doesn't have to be cruel or painful or degrading. That marriage can be a partnership of equals, built on mutual respect and genuine affection. That everyone, regardless of gender or circumstance, deserves to be treated with dignity and kindness. They lived in a time and place where women had few rights and fewer options, where domestic abuse was often ignored or tacitly accepted, where interfering in a marriage was seen as inappropriate no matter how much suffering was occurring behind closed doors. But they refused to accept those limitations. They chose something better, something more, and in doing so they helped change the world around them, one person, one family, one generation at a time. So when you hear the story of Grace and Nathan, remember that it's not just a tale from the past. It's a reminder of what's possible when we refuse to accept cruelty as inevitable, when we stand up for those who need help, when we believe that everyone deserves a chance at happiness. It's a challenge to be better, to do better, to create the kind of world where no one has to starve in silence, where no one has to suffer alone, where everyone has the opportunity to find real love. And it's a promise that such love is possible, that it exists, that it's worth fighting for. Grace and Nathan proved it. They lived it. And their story continues to inspire everyone who hears it, reminding us all that sometimes the most powerful thing we can do is simply refuse to look away, to see suffering and say this ends now, to offer kindness to someone who desperately needs it. That's what Nathan did on that hot May afternoon in 1884 when he heard Grace scream. He didn't hesitate, didn't calculate the cost to himself, didn't worry about propriety or consequences. He just acted, driven by the simple conviction that letting someone starve was wrong, that a man who would do such a thing was no man at all, that Grace deserved better. And Grace, for her part, proved that survival isn't just about enduring. It's about finding the strength to change, to grow, to become more than your circumstances. She didn't just survive Thomas's cruelty, she transcended it. She built a new life, a better life, and in doing so she showed everyone around her what was possible with courage and support and unwavering determination. Their love story wasn't simple or easy. It was complicated by divorce and scandal and social judgment. But they persevered because what they had was real and worth fighting for. They built their happiness brick by brick, day by day, choice by choice. And in the end, they created something that lasted long after they were gone, a legacy of love and partnership and mutual respect that continues to inspire. So here's to Grace and Nathan Jennings, to the cowboy who refused to walk away and the woman who found the courage to start over. To a love that began in the darkest circumstances, but grew into something beautiful and lasting. To a partnership that proved what's possible when two people truly commit to each other's well-being and happiness. To a story that reminds us all that sometimes the greatest love stories come from the most unexpected places, and that real love isn't about grand gestures or perfect circumstances, but about choosing each other, day after day, through everything life throws at you. They rest together now on that ridge overlooking the land they loved, the ranch they built, the family they raised. And if you visit on a quiet evening when the sun is setting and the wind carries the scent of sage across the desert, you might just feel their presence still. Two souls intertwined for eternity, still grateful for every moment they shared, still in love after all these years. That's the real happily ever after, not the fairy tale version where everything is perfect and easy, but the real one where two imperfect people find each other and build something beautiful together despite the odds. Where love isn't a destination but a journey, one they took hand in hand from that first moment in the kitchen until their last breath and beyond. Grace and Nathan Jennings lived, loved, and left the world better than they found it. And really, what more could anyone ask for than that?